In this video, what we'll be looking at our liquidity ratio. So in the previous video, we looked at profitability ratios. Now we're looking at our liquidity ratios. And what we're looking at here, we are looking at the company's ability to meet their short-term obligations. So what we are measuring is, we are measuring if our company will be able to pay off their short-term liabilities, okay? And under these liquidity ratios, the first one that we have is the current ratio, um, arguably the most popular one, the current ratio. And what we're looking at when we look at the current ratio, we're looking at the ability of the company to utilize its current assets to pay off its current liability. So the formula for current ratio is current assets divided by current liabilities. And the way in which we're going to measure those ratios is we'll be looking at the number of times we are able to utilize our assets to pay off our short-term liabilities. All right. So once again, we're going to do it for 2 years, 2023 and 2024, still the same company, think numbers. And we're going to start ourselves off with 2023, and we're going to look at the current assets for 2023. Now, if we look at our statements here, we'll see we had inventory, trade receivables, cash and cash equivalents, and the sum of these, so 40,000 plus the 35,000 plus the 15,000 for the year 2023, amounted to 90,000 rands of current assets in that year. Divide that with our current liabilities, and our current liabilities in 2023 were 20,000 rands. 20,000 rands. And what that will then give you, it'll give you a current ratio of 4.5 is to 1. Now, what you want to do is every time you are dealing with a liquidity ratio that has current liabilities in it, you want to always make sure that our current liabilities is to 1, because what we're essentially calculating here, we're essentially calculating how many assets in comparison to liabilities do we have in order for us to be able to pay off our short-term liabilities. And what you want is you will always make current liabilities 1. So what this is telling me is that in 2023, we had 4.5 times more assets than we had current liabilities, which is good because then it means we can at least pay off our current liabilities 4 times. Then the next one we're going to look at is our 2024 ratio, where we're looking at our current assets. So 60,000 plus 45 plus the 25 will give us that we had a total of 130,000 rands of current assets, where my current liabilities was only my trade payables at 30,000. And what you'll get there then is that our current ratio is 4.33 is to 1. Okay, so we can see that our current assets, our current ratio did dip just a little bit in the year 2024. And that also could be because even though the current assets did increase, but so did current liability. So ideally, you want a current ratio that is between 1.5 to 3 because this is considered healthy. And a lower current ratio, a lower than 1 current ratio, it may indicate that our company might have some liquidity problems. However, a higher one, let's say higher than 3, because ideally what you want is 1.5 to 3, it will suggest that we are not efficiently using our assets. I mean, it is most definitely good to have a lot of assets in the business. However, you don't want to not utilize your assets properly. All right, then we'll move on to the next one. And the next ratio we have, also one of the most popular ones, it's the quick ratio, or also popularly known as the asset test ratio. Remember, we can use both of these terms interchangeably. So the next one we're going to look at, we're going to look at the asset test ratio, which is essentially our current ratio. However, now we have excluded inventory. And the reason why we do that is because what the asset test ratio looks at, it looks at the immediate liquidity without inventory. Because remember, you can't really depend on inventory because supply and demand is always fluctuating. So you can't really sort of gauge how well your inventory might sell. Okay. So what we're looking at with the asset test ratio, we want to see, are we still liquid without considering our inventory? And what we're going to do is we'll take our current ratio, but we'll tweak it a little bit and remove our inventory and still divide that by my current liabilities. All right. So once again, the first one we're going to look at the year 2023, where our current assets, as we had previously calculated, was going to be 90,000. So 90,000 minus that 40,000, or you can just say, I'm just going to add trade receivables and cash equivalents, which is going to give you a current assets value of 50,000 without inventory. Divide this once again with our current liability of 20,000. And you will find that our asset test ratio in 2023 was then, let's write this here, 2.5 is to 1. 2.5 is to 1. So now when we compare our current ratio to our asset test, you will see that the removal of inventory has quite a drastic, really drastic effect on our ratio, because now we are 2.5 is to 1, which is still positive because it means we can utilize our current assets without inventory at least 2.5 times in order to pay off our current liabilities. Oh, not 2025, 2024. Now looking at 2024, right? Our current assets initially added up to 130,000. So from there, we're going to minus the 60,000 of inventory, or you can just say I'm adding trade receivables and adding cash and cash equivalents, which will then give you that our current assets is 70,000 divided by the current liabilities of 30,000, which will then give you an asset test ratio of 2.33 is to 1. All right. Still a positive ratio, even though it did go down in the year 2024, still a positive ratio. And what you want with the asset test ratio is you ideally want 1 to about 1.5, because that is considered a healthy asset test ratio. And if it is above 1, then it shows that we can meet our short-term liabilities without having to rely on inventory. All right. Then we'll move on to the next one, which is our cash asset ratio. So the third one under liquidity ratios is our cash asset ratio. And what this one is, I think it's probably the most brutal liquidity ratio, because what it looks at absolute liquidity. So what we are looking at cash that is readily available. Okay. So next one, cash asset. Oh, let's write that a bit better there. Cash asset ratio. All right. And the formula for our cash asset ratio, what we're looking at cash and cash equivalents. So our readily available cash. So cash and cash equivalents. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide this by our current liabilities. All right, so we divide this by our current liabilities. So let's look at 2023. So we're going to start off with my year 2023, and our cash and cash equivalents for 2023 amounted up to 15,000 divided by my current liabilities of 20,000, which would have then given us a cash asset ratio of 0.75. And we jump over to 2024. In 2024, our cash and cash equivalents amounted up to 25,000 and our current liabilities amounted to 30,000, which will then give us a cash asset ratio of 0.83. And remember, since we are comparing this to current liabilities, we'll then show it as is to 1. So ideally for this ratio, what you want is you want a 0.5 to about 1 ratio, because what it indicates is that it indicates that the company has enough liquid cash to pay for the short-term debts. However, if it's too high, it might indicate that the company is storing excessive cash rather than investing it. Because remember, they say, saving is good, but investing is greater. And if we look at Think Numbers cash asset ratio, we can see they are sitting comfortably between the 0.5 to 1 sort of like ideal range. All right, and that is all on liquidity ratios. See you in the next one.